Hey, back working on the ute again. Gonna try and finish it off today. So what I have got done, I've got the starter motor bolted in, the gearbox is bolted on now. So it's just a matter of putting all the external parts back on, filter, all the wiring, hoses, etc., radiator, AC pump, all that stuff. Then I'll fill it up with coolant and oil. I've also got to tension the crank pulley nut. I think it was 430 newton meters, so I'll do that as well before I put the radiator and everything back on. Yeah, so I'll start doing all that now. Got most of the wiring hoses hooked up on the inlet side of the engine. Gonna start putting all the power steering stuff back on now, so that's all we'll hook up down there. Get the reservoir and everything on, and then after that I will put the exhaust manifold back onto the turbo, bolt that onto the head, and I'll put the alternator and AC pump back on and plumb all that in. Touch up a few more wires that have got to be hooked up, and then I'll start making progress on putting the radiator back in. And with my radiator, because it was stuffed, had to buy a new one. I've got a wider one, so I'm still hoping that my mounts are going to all fit up to that. So this should be better than the one that was in it, because the other one was aluminium plastic. This is a brass copper one, so if I have any trouble with it, I can always get it repaired instead of having to replace it, because the plastic tanks on them, if they crack, that's it, you can't really do anything about it. So I'll keep going along with what I'm up to, and hopefully we'll get this finished soon. Alrighty, got the exhaust manifold bolted on now. Now as you can see, I've got this fitting here put in, which is a temp sensor for the EGT gauge. Now the original one that I had was there, it didn't work, the gauge didn't work, the sensor probably still does. Now the reason I've got that in the smack bang in the center of the manifold is I was told by the bloke who rebuilt my engine that the true reading of how hot your engine is going to come straight out your exhaust manifold, and by going through the turbo you're going to lose about 200 degrees of temperature. So if people have got the sensor in their turbo behind it, where I did, you've got about 200 degrees less. So what happens is people will crank their boost up on their turbo not knowing that the actual temperature coming out of the exhaust is 200 degrees hotter. So if you've got 400 degrees on the gauge, you're probably going to be running around 600. So you crank it up another 100 degrees, you're already at 700. That's piston melting territory right there. So that's why I've got that one straight in the manifold. And that's going to give me a true reading of exactly how hot the engine is. And then I've got no chance of damaging the pistons or any other parts. But I'm also going to get a new wire for this sensor as well. There goes train. And I will run a new gauge for that one as well and have both sensors, and I'll have a reading of how hot, if the turbo has an issue and it gets real hot, I'll know straight away because the exhaust temperature isn't going to change, whereas the turbo might. So that's just a handy tip for anybody out there who's putting a turbo on their car or whatever. Run it on your exhaust manifold because you're going to get an accurate temperature from the engine instead of behind the turbo. Alright, so now that I've done that, I will get the alternator and AC pump on and plug up a few hoses and whatnot. Ready to get the radiator in now, so I'm going to drop that in, chuck the belts on there and the pulleys, make sure that's all good. Pretty much everything else is on. There's still the air intake pipes to fit and the intercooler, but I'll worry about that once I've got everything else onto it. So yeah, I'll quickly chuck that in and then get those pipes on, get the intercooler on, and I'll be ready to start putting some oil and coolant into it. Slightly just a little bit too wide. I'll have to take this bracket off here, slip that under the radiator, and that should sit up in there. bloody beautiful. Have a look at that, like I bought one. Radiators in, fan shrouds in, fans in, all the radiator hoses are on, all the belts are done up tight, coolant bottles on. So yeah, I've got the grill on as well now, it's up properly again, which is good, so you haven't sit there hanging. So the next step is I'm going to stick all the induction pipes back on, and then it'll be time to mount the intercooler. And got to give a shout out. This is one of the brackets, well it's the only bracket actually, for the intercooler got made up. I had an old cruddy bit of aluminium that came with it when I bought it. So I got to give a shout out to Boardman Engineering up in Moolap there. Andrew and the boys, they knocked this one up, so it should be 10 times better, hell of a lot stronger. The old aluminium one kept cracking, so yeah, I mounted this up as well. Alright, I've got the intercooler, all the pipes back on. They're all set up now. As you see, temp sensors in. It's not wired up yet. I'll worry about that after. Boost compensators hooked up to the intercooler. That was added when I got the fuel pump done. That's all plumbed in. All the throttles set up. So now what I'll do is I'll put the battery in and I'll fill up power steering, coolant and oil, and then we'll be ready to start it.